happy that you were able to join me for this Expanding Our Roots series. The whole goal of the series is just to give people an opportunity to tell their stories and to share their experiences with the community, whether they come from a diverse background or they're trying to promote social consciousness or some kind of social justice related work, and just to show Louisiana as a place that is diverse and conscious. Awesome. And I start every interview with a very simple question, and that is just asking where you're from.
Yes, that is a nice, easy softball question. Yes. So I am from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, born and raised. I've moved away, but a couple of times, but I always end up coming back. You know, there's something special about Louisiana.
What are some places that you've lived in other than Baton Rouge?
Yeah, so I've also lived in New Orleans, which, technically is still Louisiana, but it's not Baton Rouge. There's a different flavor to be from New Orleans. And I've also lived in Atlanta.
Of those two places, what would you say is the place that inspired you or moved you the most?
I will say Atlanta was the first place where every doctor that I had was a Black person. And I honestly had never experienced that before. So I had a Black dentist, I had a Black PCP, I had a Black gynecologist. And it was something very empowering to see that. Coming from the South, particularly Baton Rouge, of course we have, Black doctors and lawyers, all that kind of good stuff, but it's not as saturated as it is in Atlanta. That was just very empowering to see. A lot of times people speak of Atlanta as this Black Mecca and a place for all this opportunity. And it is, but there's definitely opportunity in other cities as well. We just have to be proactive about making it happen.
So you have lived in Baton Rouge, you lived in New Orleans, and you lived in Atlanta. But then you also mentioned that there is something about Baton Rouge that brings you back. Yeah. So tell me more about where you were living and what inspired you to come back to Baton Rouge.
Like I said, I'm born and raised in Baton Rouge. So of course that's home. So the majority of my family is here. So that's definitely always going to have a special place. But I think what makes Baton Rouge really, really special is that it really has the opportunity to be a melting pot. We have, a lot of times people speak negatively about the different fractions and sections that are in the city. And I can understand how that can be frustrating, especially when it's hard to kind of get those connections to come together. But if we utilize the opportunity to take advantage of the different diverse groups of people that we have here, I think that it can actually help grow our city in an amazing way. So that has always drawn me back, just kind of the opportunity, and, moving away definitely helps you appreciate home more. So, as I left for different cities and I would come back, I would realize, that there was something special about what I had here. And then also, we are making great strides. I think about what Baton Rouge was like before I left to move to Atlanta. And after I came back, it was almost completely different as far as infrastructure and a lot of the things that are happening in downtown in many of the different districts. And, the effort to revitalize North Baton Rouge. I mean, it's a lot of great things that are happening.
And when did you come back to Baton Rouge from Atlanta?
I moved back in 2015. Yes, 2015. I recently graduated from Full Sail University, so I waited until I finished that degree, and I finished that in 2014. So after I finished that up, then I moved at the top of 2015.
So let me go back a little bit, because a lot of the people that I've interviewed, many of them I know fairly recently in my life. When I started the 821 Project, I met them through the work we did through 821 or through other organizations that I've supported and frequented. Mm-hmm. But you are the first person I've interviewed who predates my founding of 821 or
Yeah.
predates my whole social justice journey.
Mm-hmm.
I know you through Y Teens. Talk to me about Y Teens and how you were involved with that and the kind of work that you were able to do with Y Teens.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I didn't know if you wanted to talk about me knowing you, as a kid, but yes. So, and this just makes this even more special. I was thinking about this last night as preparing, for this interview about how to see your evolution and where you've come from and the work that you're doing is really amazing. It's so great. And so, so with the YWCA, I was a program manager there. And one of the programs that we had was called Y Teens, and it was for young people ages 13 to 19. And we met once a month, and our goal was to enrich young people in any way possible. So whether it was education, the arts, social activism, volunteer work, we were trying to just tap into the many things that a young person will need to grow and to be productive citizens, essentially. So each month, we'd have different topics. We may have different guest speakers or different service projects that we would have. And of course, we had fun things too, because, of course, teens want to have fun and, go play and all that kind of good stuff and interact with each other. But the goal of the group was to form that camaraderie among the young people and to show them what good citizenship is like. And that's not just about having opportunity for yourself, but for creating opportunities for your community and realizing that, you're a piece of a bigger puzzle. So that's everything that we really try to continually instill in Y Teens. So not just enriching themselves, but enriching their community. And how can you do that? And as a young person, there's plenty of things you can do, and so that's the things that we try to showcase and help them navigate through.
And I definitely remember the kind of work that Y Teens did. We fed people on Thanksgiving. We did Christmas gift wrapping. We did sex education, which was something that a lot of schools don't really get into, but are very important for young people. And we also talked about some pretty serious issues as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's the great mix between, like I said, like the volunteer piece and just the education piece as well. It's always great to volunteer, especially it gratifies you, but it also helps your community and realizing the help that other people need, and that, just spending some time serving food on Thanksgiving or, helping people wrap their Christmas gifts and just seeing how excited people can be about all of that, it just is a great feeling. But also the educational piece, you're absolutely right. In EBR, one of the goals of YWCA and the Youth and Teen Services program was to go into middle and high schools and to teach on abstinence education. And so, of course, that included sex education, anatomy, sexually transmitted diseases, all of that, as well as so we can give a good backdrop so young people would have a full understanding of what we were trying to educate them for and with. And so I just, I remember just going into schools and talking to young people, and some of them had never heard of the term abstinence before. So, you would think that just kind of everybody knows the same thing and everybody's working on the same playing field, but they're not. So to be able to educate young people and not kind of preach at them and be, dogmatic about it, but to, really trust them as far as how they're going to process the information and help guide them toward making the best decisions for their lives and, being healthy and thoughtful as far as thinking long-term. Like I remember always telling you guys to think long-term and not just the short gratification, but think long-term as far as what you do now is going to affect you, moving forward.
And what was your favorite part about working with Y Teens?
I love young people, and I really, really love seeing growth. And I hear a lot of teachers say this, like when they see a student grasp onto an idea and they see it flourish, like that's exciting for them. And the same thing was for me with you guys, with Y Teens. I love, just consistently being with you guys like every month. That was something I really looked forward to. And it's something I still miss being able to do that. But I am still connected to a few of you guys. And, that's really great to be able to say that, I'm really blessed to be able to say that I was impactful in some small way in your lives. And that means a lot.
Y Teens was the first organization that I was involved in that I genuinely enjoyed as a teenager, because awesome. I've been involved with a lot. I was involved with a lot as a teenager. I did word crew. I did Forward Arts. I was a people-to-people ambassador. But Y Teens predated all of that because at the time I didn't really have a venue or an outlet to express myself or to be involved in my community. And my mom was like, hey, here's Y Teens. This is cool, amazing opportunity for you to get involved and to, get some volunteer service and also, meet some people. And I was like, okay, cool. And it was awesome. And a full circle moment, our Y Teens events often happened at what was then Dean Tower, what's now Mid-City Tower.
Right.
821's first office was in Mid-City Tower.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah, that is definitely a full circle moment.
Yeah.
And it talks about destiny. And, I always find when I hear moments like that, it just always trips me out because, I feel like God definitely, kind of gives us little foreshadowing, within our lives. And if we're just open to just pay attention to how things are playing out, that's awesome. That's so great.
But I also know that Y Teens no longer exist. And I'm not sure if you can talk about why it no longer exists, but what happened to Y Teens?
Basically, that program was a federally funded program, and the funding got cut, unfortunately. It was during the time that Bobby Jindal was governor. And so, of course, the priorities of what they felt were necessary for the state, they changed. And so, unfortunately, Y Teens was one of the consequences of the federal funding being changed. So that's what happened to it. So it definitely wasn't, a lack of interest on, the YWCA's part or a lack of interest in the teens part who are part of it. It's just, the funding literally got cut.
I remember that whole early 2010s era where things were getting cut left and right. And programs were getting cut. People were an education major, and then they were the last education major of their university. It was a wild, wild time.
It was.
But you were working with the YWCA. And then you ended up, had a journey, ended up in Atlanta, and then you came back to Baton Rouge.
Yes.
And I know personally, when I went to New England for grad school, it was very rough coming back home because I left Baton Rouge as a teenager at 17. I lived in New Orleans, and then I went to New England, and I came home as a grown adult at 21. But you were already an adult leaving Baton Rouge to go to Atlanta and coming back. But that's still a bit of an adjustment because you're dealing with two different environments. So what was that adjustment like for you coming back to Baton Rouge?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great analogy. It definitely was still a transition for me. So even though I was an adult, my mom and I always joke when I left home for college, I would joke and say, I'm never moving back in with my parents. I'm grown, I'm going to do this. And up until I moved back from Atlanta, that was true. So all that time I lived on my own. I was quote unquote, independent, that sort of thing. But when I moved back from Atlanta, I did end up having to move back in with my mom for I think it was about 8 months or so before I was, fully really back on my feet and able to, reacclimate myself to the city and, job and all that kind of good stuff and getting my own place. So in that transition time, it really gave me an opportunity to do a lot of self-evaluation, to really kind of evaluate the differences between, like you said, the atmospheres of where I was at, and try to kind of pull the best out of all of it to kind of give me a really good foundation to jumpstart, I guess you could say, my second round here and being back in Baton Rouge. So it very much was, me taking the time and realizing what was really great about Atlanta that's not here, that hopefully I can play a part in bringing to Baton Rouge. What kind of energy was there? What kind of opportunities were there? What type of networking platforms were there to help better that city? And I wanted to try to bring some of those elements back to BR.
And what were some of those elements?
So some of those elements that I found really interesting was the networking piece. I'm definitely seeing it change now, present day, but, let's flash back, to 2015, when I was in Baton Rouge. There, it was really, really hard to break into certain circles because in Baton Rouge, it would be, if you meet someone, even if you're at a quote unquote networking event, if you met someone, the first question is always kind of like, where'd you go to school? Meaning what high school you went to, right? And kind of immediately that would put you in a certain box. And in some ways that would be great because that's the box of the people you may want to try to connect with. But in other times, if you don't say the right school, then, you're kind of shut out. And that could be very, very frustrating. So what I found in Atlanta, though, was that they were really more open to just kind of meeting people from any sector and trying to figure out how they could collaborate together and make the most of, each other's skill sets to both profit. So people in Atlanta very much would, if they met you, they'll be like, oh, hey. And of course they always ask where you're from, because very rarely are people in Atlanta from Atlanta. So, so they'll be like, hey, where you from? What do you do? Oh, awesome. And like trying to find the mutual ground to build upon. And so that energy of that and like just that sense of, networking, I just always thought was really, really awesome. And I wanted to try to figure out, how can we bring that to Baton Rouge? Like, how can we have that idea of really connecting with people and not having like this burden of, you kind of not being from the right side of the tracks, stop us from connecting with each other, realizing that we all have something to contribute in a great way for the city.
And what are some ways that you've been able to bring those elements that you found in Atlanta to Baton Rouge? Because, Baton Rouge's culture is very different. I mean, when I think of Atlanta, it is a city with a strong presence of African Americans, but it's also a very global cosmopolitan place. Like the airport is the busiest in the world. Right. It's a place where it's a business city. People from all walks of life live here. Mm-hmm. Baton Rouge isn't exactly a place that is associated with those kind of things.
Absolutely. Yeah. So for me, it was about bringing in a mindset and trying to kind of spread that to my sphere of influence and the people who I was around and the companies that I worked with, in hopes that it would umbrella out. Because, I'm only one person, so it's not like I can say, yes, I'm going to build all of these infrastructures and I'm going to do all of that, So I didn't have that capacity, but I did have a capacity to try to, in the leadership roles that I have, and that I had at the time, try to embed that mindset. So what I would do is consistently try to figure out, like break the monotony. A lot of times in Baton Rouge, like what I find is that when people, I guess, connect with one person, like that's the person, like just using an event, for example, like, hey, I got a caterer. I'm going to use this one caterer for the rest of my life. And even though that's great to be loyal, there's so much opportunity that you could try to give to other vendors. So what I would try to do, like, let's say, for example, when I came back to Baton Rouge, I became the marketing manager for the Bella Baton Rouge Casino and Hotel. And that's one of the instances of kind of like the loyalty program, I guess you can say. And I would be like, hey, there are tons of other caterers, other photographers, other bands, other musicians, like just other people that we can bring into this network so that everybody can share in this opportunity. And so it's not so much of trying to X people out, but bring people in. So, like, for instance, if we have, every month, if we have an event and we need a caterer, I would try to basically like, okay, let's say every first and second month is going to be this caterer, then third, fourth is going to be this caterer. So we can kind of spread the wealth around and create opportunity. And so that's definitely something I would try to do. And then have this conversation about like, hey, you see how I brought you in and I want to try to make this opportunity for you. Be sure to pay it forward and, explain the importance of like, once you have a door open for yourself, don't just close it behind you. If you can, try to make an opportunity so that someone else can come behind you and share in that opportunity as well.
My mom would call that each one, reach one, teach one. Like each person reaches out to the next person, teaches them a skill, and it's almost like a cycle. Everybody is teaching and reaching out. And then you do create this culture where people aren't just thinking about the people that are familiar to them, but they're thinking about collectively uplifting and
Right.
building community in many different ways.
Absolutely.
I was reading your bio and you have a lot of experience in marketing. I mean, that's a core of your experience.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to explore that a little bit more because we've talked about kind of your experiences living in different places, working with white teens, but I want to get a little deeper into your community work. Is marketing a part of the way in which you promote the values and the elements that you're trying to promote in the community?
It's definitely other ways, but like you said, it is the core. And I think that my work in marketing and what I try to do is a perfect example of it doesn't matter what industry you're in or like what your career path is, you can still find a way to be effective and make change in your community. So it would be very easy for me to say, oh, I just do marketing, like how could I possibly try to, better the community in some way or to make an impact. But what I found is utilizing what I can, where I can, I definitely can make a difference. So what I try to do is in marketing, for instance, every single marketing platform or company that I've worked for and I'm creating their marketing messages, I try to be very mindful of our social climate, very inclusive, trying to speak of equity and not just equality, like trying to put out that message for those organizations. A lot of times I'm in rooms where I'm the only minority, not only the only Black person, but maybe the only woman. And so having that voice in the room to be able to bring up issues that are often ignored and realizing that those things need to be addressed. And, and that's my way of using my power of where I am to make sure those marketing messages are sensitive to what's happening, are relevant to what's happening, and making sure that we're honoring people in the right way. So to me, that's really, really important. And then also too, I'm all about, and this kind of, I guess, stems from my YWCA days of like, I always try to empower people where possible. So the knowledge that I've gained in marketing and branding, I try to create opportunities to teach other people this. And because I know not everyone has, funds to hire a marketing person or to hire interns or, to try to put together their marketing campaigns, especially if you have small business owners and that sort of thing. So a lot of times I throw free events where people are able to come and to learn, and I'll, set a topic on marketing or branding where they're able to come and learn for free. Like, I'm not trying to, get a money grab from anybody. It's really about me trying to share the wealth of knowledge and try to help give them some stepping stones in some way. So, and I think anybody, like I said, any industry, whatever your skill set is, teach the next person, if you can, and try to help them along their way as much as possible.
I feel like it's beautiful that you use your professional skills to make a change, because oftentimes the people that I've spoken to are very strictly organizers, or their work is to do social change, but marketing isn't always something that's considered as a part of social change.
Right.
I think now is probably the best example of marketing as a tool for social change, especially at the time of this interview. We have global protests against racial injustice, which means a lot of corporations and entities have been issuing statements and graphics talking about Black Lives Matter and talking about racial injustice and things like that. But I know you're currently working in a marketing capacity with the Knock Knock Children's Museum, but marketing is something you've been doing for a long time, which means that you had to navigate these challenges prior to this big eruption of support for racial justice movements. Right. So tell me about some of the accomplishments and challenges with combining your professional skills of marketing with this idea of social consciousness that you talk about.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question. And it is, Du Bois talks about, your two-ness. And I definitely feel that two-ness in my professional setting, not just, current day, but just like you said, going back, just because I have the mindset of always trying to figure out how I can interject the voice of the voiceless where I'm at. And so a lot of times that's probably bringing up things that, you know, people aren't even thinking about. But like you said, now the climate is different where everybody's thinking about it now because of, you know, the big resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. For me, it's all about your professionalism and your work ethic. I find that people are more receptive in a professional setting. People are more receptive to a message if you're presenting it in a professional way where you're trying to show inclusivity. So not to like beat on a stereotype, but a lot of times, you know, I could be perceived as the angry Black woman because I am outspoken, I am straightforward, and, you know, I'm going to tell you how I feel. Now, in a professional setting, I still do those things, but I realize I have to be strategic about when I share my voice and when it's going to be the most effective. So, you know, we can use present day as a perfect example. Like you said, all these companies are, you know, were releasing statements about supporting Black Lives Matter and like how that's going to go. And I had to be very strategic about bringing up to knock knock, like, hey, we need to make a statement as well, because you would think a children's museum, like, why does that even need to say anything about it? You know, that has nothing to do with it. But in the overall sense of our community, it absolutely does. And we want to, you know, encourage our children to be, because, you know, these learned behaviors are taught at a young age. So we want to make sure that our children are aware and are being taught about inclusivity and equality and being anti-racist, you know? So if I would have just ran in the door like, we need to do this because it's important, and, you know, screaming and kind of just being like, we gonna do this and that's it, you know, people build up barriers like when you come at them in an aggressive way. And so, and it's not that you have to shrink yourself to make someone else feel comfortable, but it is about your approach in, look, this is really important, and presenting the facts as to why and being able to back it up. And, you know, once I was able to present that case, it was easy breeze. Like, it was like, of course we need to do this. Like, almost like, why didn't we think of this, you know, before? And then it's like, okay, let's get it done. So that would be my, you know, recommendation in my platform is, you know, to say, come with your receipts, you know, come with your facts, and be professional about your presentation of it. Like, you can be impassioned, you can be, you know, serious and strong-willed about it, but you have to, you know, kind of meet your audience where they're at, you know, and like, just like you wouldn't want someone coming up to you all aggressive, you know, same goes the other way. Like, nobody wants to be presented information in an aggressive way. You know, you want them a part of the team. So you want to try to bring them in.
Part of the challenge with being a minority or being a person of color is being strategic. Mm-hmm. Because I think that as people of color, as Black people specifically, we have to oftentimes present our arguments for social justice or equity in ways that don't offend people who may not share our values or our identities. Because when you live in a myopia, this idea like you live in this world and everything is a certain way, then you don't really get to see how the other half lives, the other experiences. Mm-hmm. And so when somebody comes to you with a very different reality, it can be very easy to reject that. Be like, oh my God, like, no, that's not happening.
Right.
I'm very happy to hear that Knock Knock was like, yeah, I get it. I feel it. We're with it. Easy breezy, beautiful. Let's do a statement. Yeah. And I also know that Baton Rouge is a city with a lot of African Americans. I don't know if it's a majority Black city, but it's a city that has a lot of African Americans. So even if the social justice message may not have resonated as strongly, it's about the market. Your market is mostly Black. So, you know, you should be catering to your market.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, I definitely I'm glad that companies can be receptive to that. But you also mentioned several times this idea of promoting inclusion and equity. Mm-hmm. And to be frank, I've heard that term so many times from so many different people that it could mean something very different from one person compared to the other. Yeah. What does inclusion and equity mean to you personally?
Sharing opportunity. And it also means, what's the best way I can say this? And it also means not excluding anyone based on their race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, etc. Like for instance, like, if we're trying to gather some voices to get a focus group together. I'm thinking, of course, with my marketing hat, like we're trying to get a focus group together to try to better understand a product or a service or how we can impact the community. If you genuinely want to hear from that community, I'm probably going to be the person in the room that's going to ask, how many women do you have in this group? How many Native American people do you have in this group? How many Black people do you have in this group? Do you have any gay or trans people in this group? If you're really trying to be inclusive and trying to hear from everyone, because like the point you brought up, sometimes it's not even so much that you disagree with someone's viewpoint, but you probably just didn't even see it. Like you didn't even know that existed. And so you have to have those different voices in the room so that every vantage point is represented as much as possible, So it's like trying to create that space where, if, I think a lot of people kind of just get trapped up in exclusivity and kind of just being like, oh, if I got a Black person, a white person, there we go. It's like, it's more than just that. It even goes into age because, if we're talking about the workplace, a lot of times we get into age discrimination and, and it could be discriminated against for being too young or being too old. Like, that goes both ways. So just really trying to have the opportunity to bring as many voices to the table as possible so that you are heard. Because I know that's usually the big frustration from people is that they feel unheard or unseen and not having the opportunity to, just reap the benefits that other people have just from purely being left out of the scenario.
And I really resonate with what you're saying about ideas of inclusion and equity, because oftentimes people do unintentionally exclude people because of blind spots that we all have.
Right.
I often wonder how we as people who believe in inclusion and equity arrive to this revelation that we need to be more inclusive, or we may need to incorporate more identities into our idea of inclusion. Because sometimes people say, oh, we want to be inclusive and welcoming, but they may feel uncomfortable when it comes to age or sexuality or gender identity or religion or national identity. Right. And then that's when the inclusion building starts to start crumbling. So walk me through your journey of getting to this idea of inclusion that you now have and now possess.
For the majority of my school years, I guess you could say, I've always been at a predominantly white institution. So whether it's elementary, middle, high school, even my college was a Jesuit college that I went to for undergraduate. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was always kind of trying to figure out how to navigate between those two worlds, essentially. And it was kind of a dichotomy, just kind of black and white. It wasn't so much of like a mix, between things, but just kind of trying to figure out those spaces and where I fit in and who I was in those spaces. So I actually wrote a paper in my sociology class in like my senior year that talked about kind of that walk and figuring out where I landed in the middle of it. And I remember my teacher, my professor wrote on the paper, like I wrote some kind of line about, Letrece is okay liking Nirvana and Tupac. And like, that doesn't make me any less black, or like make me try to be something that I'm not. Like, that's just who Letrece is. And once I kind of came upon that revelation, then for me, it was about, okay, people can be multi-layered and people can be intricate and have, these different elements of themselves. And it doesn't take away from who they are. I know we like to put people in boxes, but that doesn't take away from who people are holistically, like, and what they can offer. And so once that light bulb kind of clicked in my head, then it was like, okay, if I want people to see Letrece in like this broad way of like having all of these different things that make me who I am, then I should definitely try to view other people the exact same way. It's kind of like, the golden rule of treating people how you want to be treated. So that, like, moving forward after that, like after that light bulb clicked off for me, then that's, for me, it just kind of opened the door to all of these like questions that I would always try to ask, you know, when we're trying to say, are we bringing people in? You know, because it was like, hey, I know if I have all of these different elements about myself, then other people have different layers and elements of themselves too. And then on top of that, there's other people on top of that, you know? So like that for me was the linchpin that made me realize like how we can continue to just keep peeling back the layer and like try to bring more people in, just thinking about myself and the many layers that I have.
Life is a journey. And sometimes we get to certain destinations on, you know, a carriage and horse. And then sometimes we get to destinations on a bullet train. And I think that I got to the inclusion definition idea because of my own experiences being bullied and stigmatized and marginalized, and both societally speaking and in my own social world.
Yeah.
And I think that because I had those experiences, I was able to be more vocal about social injustice and to be able to understand and include more people in my inclusion umbrella, because I realized, okay, you know, I know how it feels to be judged. I know how it feels to be misunderstood. I know how it feels to be misrepresented. Why would I want to do on to others what was done to me?
Right. You don't want to the same pain.
Right. And also hurt people. So if I'm truly going to heal, I can't treat people the way that I was treated, because that means that I am not fully healing from my ability to be a better person and to heal from my pain.
That's so true. That's very, very true. Yeah. And so I share that same sentiment, you know, just again, like I want to treat people how I would want to be treated. And so like all the grace that I hope people, you know, extend to me, all of the, you know, understanding, all of the acceptance, you know, I have to be able and willing to give that back out if I want to get it.
I read in your bio that you are not only into marketing in a professional sense, but you also do events and you are a writer.
Yeah.
So I want to know what your writing journey is like, and, you know, what kind of books you've written, and if you're currently writing another book right now with this pandemic kind of forcing us all to hunker down and find some things to do.
My relationship with writing has been since I was little. Like, you know, I was one of those little girls who like always had a little notebook and was, you know, writing my thoughts down and that sort of thing. And but as far as trying to really structure my writing, that started in middle school. I remember we were introduced to poetry, and you know, we had a class assignment where we were supposed to write a poem, and I just found like just that platform so amazing. Like I was like, this is great. And it just kind of clicked right there. And I remember I wrote the poem and I turned it in, and the teacher was like, this is amazing. I want to submit this to a poetry contest. And she was like, you know, have your parents sign this permission slip and so that I can do it. And I was like, okay. And sure enough, they did that. And I ended up being published in an anthology of poems from all young people. They were all middle school students. And all the people who were in that book ended up going to DC for like this poetry convention. And that just kind of opened my world up to like what writing could offer you. Like, you know, of course, you know, I read books before that, but just the opportunity, like the idea of writing being something that could be a career, you know, or that could be really something that provides new opportunities that I had never experienced before. Like that was the catalyst of that for me. So trying to mix kind of the marketing with the writing and the communications piece was just kind of like the best of both worlds for me. The writing that I started to do was professional writing essentially, because it started with like press releases and content for websites and doing some freelance journaling. I did a lot of that, doing op-ed pieces, you know, for magazines and all that sort of thing. So that's, you know, was the start of my writing. And then when I started the books, honestly, when I moved back to Baton Rouge from Atlanta, I had so many stories to tell. Like, you know, we were talking about the experience and the difference from, you know, that city and the next, and just in my life and throwing events, you know, throwing events at the well, now it's the Raising Cane's River Center. You know, I was an event coordinator there and doing events at the Bell and just doing my own personal events. You know, and meeting different artists and celebrities from doing all that. I had stories to tell. Like I just had a lot. And so people would often, say to me like, hey, you should write a book about that. Just kind of like all of these stories and lessons that you have. And for my first book, what I really wanted to do was not just kind of have a memoir type of thing. I wanted to, if I'm going to tell my story, I wanted to do it in a way that could be helpful for other people, because as great as and blessed as my life has been, it has been struggles. There have been turmoil. There's been like disappointment. And so finding your way out of those things can be difficult, but I definitely wanted to show people that it is possible. So a lot of times people kind of see where I am now and they just think that it was easy street all the way through it. And it absolutely wasn't. So the way that we structured the first book, it was structured almost like a journal, because like I said, I always write all the time. And for me, that's a way for me to process information. It's a way for me to, learn and understand. So the way that the book is set up, it's set up basically where I would have my writing piece that would explain whatever topic or lesson. And then there would be a writing prompt associated with that lesson. And then there would be space in the book for the reader to write and reflect on what the prompt is. So whether I was talking about, self-acceptance or, loving your career or trying to find out what your aspirations are, I would share a personal story of my dealing with that topic and then give the reader a writing prompt so that they can write through their situation in that topic as well. So again, always trying to figure out how to educate people and help them along their journey using my lessons as a catalyst. And then I've written 2 marketing books after that. Again, all about trying to help people understand the industry, understand that they can be very effective without having a ton of money. Because I know a lot of people get intimidated by that. They kind of think, how can I get the word out about what I have going on? Like, I don't have this big marketing budget, but I want people to know, especially now, in the age of social media, people have access to so much. And, if you kind of learn these, tricks of the trade, you can definitely be effective. And so those 2 books, help people understand, like give them those basic concepts of marketing and branding and how to utilize that in a real effective way without, breaking the bank.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. It sounds like you're using all of your gifts to make a difference in the lives of people. And it seems like you spend a lot of your life using your gifts and your experiences to help young and old and in between just to be better and to do better. I honestly feel like this conversation could go on forever, but we can't go on forever. Right. That being said, I do have 2 more questions. You're someone who is very rooted in this community. So I wonder if you have any perspectives on how South Louisiana could improve or this country could be better for its citizens based on your own point of view and your own experiences.
I think it really the first step has to be like self-reflection and just kind of realizing where you're at. You can't heal something or improve something if you're not acknowledging what the problem is. And so that's for everyone. That's for all of us across the board. Even those of us who are working for social justice and change, like you said, we all have our blind spots. We all have our biases. We all have things that we can improve on. So, I think if we all come from that neutral space of ourselves first, like acknowledging the things that we need to work on and improve first, then I think that goes into, like I was speaking about earlier, of the golden rule of like, okay, if I know I have things I need to correct, then I can recognize that there are things outside of myself that other people need to correct. And hopefully that's where that grace comes in at, because it's like you want people to show mercy on you, and then you should be willing to show mercy on other people and not exclude them and not, discount their feelings or discount their experiences or anything like that. So I think just, especially for the South, especially for South Louisiana, but like you said, for the world in general, we're genuinely all in this together. Like our experiences are different. We come from different backgrounds, but we are a community, and we really cannot thrive if we're segregated, if we're, kind of in our own little silos. Um, we're surviving that way, but we aren't really thriving in how we really could be as a community. And so if we really want to be better, we have to be together on it.
This pandemic that we're currently experiencing during the time of this interview is probably showing more now than ever we are connected. We don't live in the world by ourselves, and everything we do has a consequence, and it will impact other people. Definitely. And I know that we've talked about a lot, but I also know that sometimes questions that are asked can't always give the full opportunity to a person to express everything they want to say. So I want to ask you the last question. What is something that you'd like to say or express that you haven't been able to express during the time of this interview?
I definitely just want to reiterate that everyone has a power and you have a voice, regardless of your age, your sex, your gender, your occupation, whatever labels you have on yourself, whatever that is, we all have our individual power and voice, and we can use it in a positive way to affect change in our community. Whether you do it through social activism, if you're out in the streets protesting, if you're writing press releases, if you're at the grocery store, whatever it is, you have a voice and a power. And I feel like people sometimes get discouraged or frustrated because they feel like there's only one way to be an activist, or there's only, one way to be impactful. And that's just not true. Just like there's so many different career options. Like not everybody's not going to be a lawyer. Everyone's not going to be, a clerk at the grocery store. Everyone's not going to be a dentist. Like everybody has their role, and we need all of those roles for a healthy and a robust society. Like imagine if there was nobody in the world that cleaned houses. Imagine if we had, there were no people who would be willing to, wash the windows or to wash your car or to, who wanted to cut your hair or we need every single thing. And like you said, I think that this pandemic has shown us how interconnected we are once those things were taken away from us. So it's like, once we couldn't just, hop to the store, or we couldn't just go get our nails done, or we couldn't just go to the movies. Like all of those things made us realize how important they are, regardless of, what every element is. It all has its importance. And so I think if we can take that away from this conversation and just moving forward, just know that wherever you're at, you have a purpose, you have a power, and how you live it is, how you're going to affect some change.
Those are very powerful words to end on. I think that we all have the capacity to make a difference, and we have the capacity to make a change no matter what we do and how we do it. And coincidentally, that's 821's message. You don't have to run for governor or run for mayor or, be in the streets protesting. That's a very effective way to have your voice heard, but there are millions of ways to have your voice heard. Just like in a choir, you got the baritones, you got the tenors, got the altos, got the sopranos. Every voice part is necessary, and no voice part can do it alone. No voice part can carry it alone. And so every voice is important to create a chorus, to create a musical masterpiece. So if we're trying to make a difference, every voice part is necessary. So the people who are on the streets, the people that are in the boardrooms, the people that are in the courtrooms, the classrooms, we all need to find a way to make a difference and make an impact, even if it's just through a conversation with someone who doesn't look like us, or just through our own, as you say, self-reflection and self-improvement.
Absolutely. I co-sign that 100%. Absolutely.
I'm so thankful that you were able to share your story with me and to express yourself. And thank you so much for participating in the series. This is another story and a collection of beautiful stories that really showcases that this state has beautiful people who come from all walks of life, all parts of the earth.
Yeah.
that are working to try and make this community a community in which we are problem solvers and not just problems to be solved.
I love that. Absolutely. And it has been an honor. I'm so honored that you thought of me. And like I said, it kind of just seeing where you are now, it makes my heart so happy, and just continue to do great work.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.